The author of a highly critical new book about the Trump administration says people better wake up to what's going on in the White House. Bob Woodward's new book, Fear, Trump in the White House, is out tomorrow. It's published by Simon and Schuster, a division of CBS, and Woodward spoke to our David Martin about the book, first on CBS Sunday Morning.
How many people did you interview?
Oh, over 100. I would say that maybe half of those are key people.
The theme of Woodward's book, that aides fear what the president might do if allowed to follow his impulses, received an unusual confirmation last week when the New York Times published this anonymous article written by a person described as a senior official in the Trump administration. I work for the president, but like-minded colleagues and I have vowed to thwart parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations.
I have no idea who it is. It's very important who it is. It's very important whether this is somebody who witnessed and participated. And quite frankly, if there was a person in the White House or the administration who wanted to tell me what's in that op-ed piece, I would say, okay, name me who was there. What is the specific incident? As you know from having read my book, there are dates and times and participants. I wouldn't have used it.
Too vague?
Well, too vague and does not meet the standards of trying to describe specific incidents. Specific incidents are the building blocks of journalism, as you well know.
Fear, Trump in the White House, is Woodward's 19th book, and he says reporting it took him deeper inside a working White House than he's ever been before.
This one was in the belly of the beast.
And what did you conclude about the beast?
That people better wake up to what's going on.
With us now is CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. David, I'm so happy to have you here because normally I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. Yeah. So Bob Woodward interviewed 100 people, at least, right? What were the sort of basic themes that kept on coming up over and over again?
Well, it was the unpredictability and impulsiveness of the president and how members of the White House staff would go about controlling those impulses so that they didn't, he didn't take actions that they thought, the staff thought, would cause irreparable harm to the United States. So you have these surreal scenes of White House aides literally stealing documents off the president's desk in his Oval Office so he can't sign them and take an action which they thought was counter to the best interests of the United States.
Right.
You know, you think about that for a minute. Here you have the elected president of the United States, and you have these unelected officials who are subverting his actions. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of the way a White House is supposed to act. Yeah. A White House staff is supposed to facilitate a president's actions, not hinder them.
Yeah, and I mean, that was one of a few sort of hints of what's in the book that we got. Yeah. The president sort of giving direct orders and having members of his own cabinet saying, oh, don't worry, disregard that. But that specific episode, you talked to him about that, and we have a little bit of a clip, so let's listen to it.
How do they get away with that?
He doesn't remember. If it's not on his desk, if it's not immediately available for action, it goes away.
So that gave us a little more insight into that piece of information. What are we to glean from that? You know, I'm sure he received or heard many stories that he could not include in the book. He chose to include this one in particular.
Well, I think he included the stories for which he was confident were accurate and which he had from more than one source. And in that particular story, which President Trump has said never happened, Woodward actually includes the document in the body of the book. And it's photographed lying in a file that is labeled keep, as in keep away from the president.
Wow.
So this was a specific episode which he had very high confidence in its accuracy, and I think that's why he chose to begin his book with it.
You know, right away after we started to read sort of portions of the book, the president, the White House started pushing back. He went from, at a different time, praising Bob Woodward and to you know, criticizing him. I think the president just tweeted this morning calling the book a joke. Did you ask him about just how he feels about the way the president's been reacting?
Yeah, he's very unupset by it. He says, look, the president's got a right to say anything he wants to about the book. What he is concerned about is that whether people find anything inaccurate in the book. But look, this is a guy who has probably the greatest track record in American journalism. And when I asked him if he was ready for a tweet storm from the president, he said, well, I've been there. And of course, that was in the days before tweets, but in Watergate, the White House routinely denounced the shabby reporting by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein in their stories in the Washington Post. And then eventually had to issue a public apology to Woodward and Bernstein.
Yeah, it's shabby when he's talking about you, but not when he's talking about everyone else, right? Let's talk a little bit about that op-ed. What was his reaction to that op-ed, the anonymous?
He was underwhelmed by it, primarily because it just didn't contain enough information. I can see that as sort of Woodward's first interview with a source, when they say something general like that, and he will keep coming back until he gets the specifics. But he said if it had been just that op-ed alone, he wouldn't have included it in his book.
I suppose based on all of his interviews, reading that op-ed was sort of like old news to him.
Yeah,
right?
it was old news, and it was vague news. So he wasn't particularly impressed by it.
This is a guy that has experience like I think no other author in terms of intimate knowledge of how a White House works and how it's supposed to work. How was this different for him, or was it?
He said he'd never seen anything like it. This is his 9th White House that he's written about in some form, and he just never saw a previous White House in which aides felt compelled to take this extreme action of stealing documents from the president.
I mean, I'm going to say it's terrifying, this idea that people who are not elected are making policy calls and ignoring the one person that was elected to do the job for the country. Did you talk to him about just how we move forward from here? This is, I think, you know, it's a nation divided. It's just so disappointing the way Washington is behaving now, whether it's the White House, whether it's the White House relationship with Congress and back and forth, the checks and balances. I mean, what's his take on our future?
Well, you know, when you're doing an interview with him, he is very much the reporter, and he doesn't tell you anything that he hasn't reported and is confident of. And so speculating about where we go from here, I tried a couple times, and he just wouldn't go there. He's stopped his reporting for this book in the spring of this year, and if I asked him anything more up to date than that, he said, I'm not current. I don't know.
Oh, that's pretty admirable. Excellent interview, David Martin. Thank you.
Sure thing.